Hi, welcome to this video. We're going to develop now exercises 7 to 11 of the influence of monetary and fiscal policy on aggregate demand. Remember, this is a book of Gregory Mankiw, Principles of Economics. The seventh question says, suppose economists observe that an increase in government spending of 10 billion raises the total demand for goods and services by 30 billion. So it means that we have an increase in GDP for 30 billion. A. If these economists ignore the possibility of crowding out, what would they estimate the marginal propensity to consume, MPC, to be? First of all, remember that anytime we have an increase in government, for example, government spending, we have two effects. The first effect is provided by the multiplier. The second one is provided by the crowding out effect. The crowding out effect subtract the situation of the increase of the GDP basically due to the increase of the demand of money. Then as a consequence we have an increase in the interest rate. Then we have a discourage, so investment is not incentive because of the higher interest rate. So this is provided by the crowding out effect. So we are not taking into account that, so we are going just to take into account that there is a multiplier effect. So then we know that the multiplier is equal to 1 over 1 minus MPC. The multiplier is 3. Then we need to find out and we need to collect the terms and solve for MPC. This 1 minus MPC is over, so it's divided. So we move to the left multiplying here, and then we just take this 3 to the other side dividing. And then we have this one minus, because this is summing, so we have here minus, and then we found out that the multiplier the marginal propensity to consume is 2/3. So then what is the value of the multiplier? We need to plug into this equation the 2/3, and then we have here that the multiplier is exactly equal to 3. We are just making this proof because we already know that the multiplier was equal to 3, because we know that we have an increase in 10 billion and we have an increase times 3 of 30 billion in the total GDP. Okay, then B. Now suppose the economists allow for crowding out. Would their new estimate of the MPC be larger or smaller than the initial one? Well, at this point, if we know that the MPC is now taking into account, now the MPC now is taking into account the crowding effect. So there is a crowding effect. So at this point, well, there are like kind of two answers. First, imagine that there's still 10 and 30. So then with this situation, now we're having crowding out and the MPC is taking into account the crowding out. So definitely this should be higher. Why? Because when we have now this a higher marginal propensity to consume, then is expected to have more than 30 billion. But due to the effect of crowding out, it will get then 30 billion. So for this situation, I would say that the marginal propensity to consumption should be higher too, because then we should be subtracted by the crowding out effect. So then I put here this should be lower. I said two answers, but no, then the only answer actually should be a MPC larger to the initial one, because then we're going to have a lower effect provided because of the crowding out effect. 8. An economy is operating with output that is 400 billion below its natural level, and fiscal policymakers want to close this recessionary gap. The central bank agrees to adjust the money supply to hold the interest rate constant, so there is no crowding out. The marginal propensity to consume 4/5, and the price level is completely fixed in the short run. in what direction, on by how much would government spending need to change to close the recessionary gap? Explain your thinking. Well, we know that here we have a gap of 400 billion. We know that the marginal propensity to consume is 4/5. Then we're going to find out the value of the multiplier. Solving for that, we have that the multiplier is exactly equal to 5. Then we need to provide the change in the government. We need to cause a change of the gap, and the gap is 400. So then we can create this simple equation when we have the change in the GDP is exactly equal to the change in the government times the multiplier. Then multiplier we can put down, then we have the change in y, the change in GDP over multiplier. We know that the gap is 400 and then the multiplier exactly equal to 5, so we need to create an expansion of government spending for 80 billion. 9. Suppose government spending increases. Would effect on aggregate demand be larger if the Federal Reserve held the money supply constant in response, or if the Fed were committed to maintaining a fixed interest rate? Explain. So then we have here the representation of the market. We have the prices and the y-axis. We have the y and the x-axis, which is basically the production, the output. We put here an AD1, the initial situation. And then we have in the left side the market of money. So we have the markets, the money supply 1, which is perfectly inelastic, completely vertical, because there is not any change in the interest rate because it's fixed by the central bank in the United States, by the Fed. And then we have here the R1, which is the equilibrium between these two curves. Then due to an spending increase, automatically the AD1 is going to be shift to the right, provided by this new situation. We have here the aggregate supply in the short run, where it is affected by prices, and then we have here higher prices and a higher level of output. Then when there are higher prices, naturally people due to since the theory of liquidity, it provides that we have a higher prices, we need definitely more money available, more money in cash to pay those goods and services that they are more expensive. So due to that situation, the monetary demand shifts to the right. As a consequence, we have here an increase and in the interest rate. Okay, this is basically the situation. Then we know that due to the crowding effect, the AD2 should be a little bit contracted to AD3, provided by a decrease of the investment. So then this should be the basically the situation. Now, once we have already this explained, we know that this is the exactly situation that we said. We know that the interest rate should be exactly the same. That's the idea of the Fed. So how could be done? Well, basically should be provided by the situation of the expansion of monetary supply to monetary supply 2, provided an R1 exactly the same, and then as a consequence provided by a situation of no effect of crowding out in this one. We know that there is going to be exactly the same level, and then the AD2 should be reached. 10. In which of the following circumstances is expansionary fiscal policy more likely to lead to a short-run increase in investment? Explain. A. When the investment accelerator is large, or when it is small? Well, when it is high. Why? Because basically when we have when we have this one, an increase in investment, a higher increase on the government spending, definitely or will provide a higher investment. Okay, that should be the idea. And when the interest sensitivity of investment large and with small, well, when it is small. Why? Because basically, well, this one, the A one, is basically provided. For example, the example in the book, it says that you have an higher spending in Boeing, and Boeing uses this money to make investment. So this is investment accelerator. So naturally, the more money you put in investment, the higher return that you will be pursuing. So basically, for this situation, is high. And when the interest sensitivity investment is large, is when it is small. Well, it is small. Why? Because remember the negative relationship between the interest rate and investment. The higher interest rate, there is a discouragement for investment to increase. So the lower sensitivity, then is going to be less affect the change in the interest rate. So then definitely when it is small. And here we have the situation of the monetary supply when we have this one, and then when we have this gap. So these are higher. So then should be like higher effect to the interest rate, because we know that the interest rate will increase provided by the increase in the government expenses. Okay, 11. Consider an economy described by the following equations, where Y is GDP, C is consumption, I investment, G government purchases, T taxes, R interest rate. If the economy were at full employment, that is its natural rate, GDP would be 2000. Explain the meaning of these equations. Let's start with the first one. Y equals Z plus I plus G. This is the definition of the GDP by the aggregate terms. So we have the total consumption plus the total investment plus the total government expenses. This is the total quantity of income of GDP. Then consumption, here we have like two parts. One, which is the 100, is what is considered in macroeconomics the autonomous consumption. It means that it doesn't matter that you don't have any income anyway, you need to consume something. This is like survivor consumption. Then we have the 0.75, which is considered the marginal propensity to consume. So any dollar that you receive more, which part you are going to spend now. For any dollar available, additional one, you're going to spend here 75 cents or 75%. Then we have here Y minus T, what is known as the available income. Why is the available income? Because you have here like the gross income between quotation marks. You need to subtract the taxes, and then you have the total money available to spend. I is exactly equal to these numbers, and we have 500, which is considered like the autonomous investment, or the investment when better than the autonomous investment. I would say that is the quantity of investment when the R, or the interest rate, is equal to 0. And R is the interest rate not providing percentage but in numbers. So for example, we have 1 as a percent of the interest rate, so then we have a level of investment of 450. So there is a negative relationship between them. Then we have the government, which is 125, is what we call in economics like exogenous government, because it's not affected by other variables. It's fixed, determined by the government actually. And then we have here T, the level of taxes. And then after having that, B, what is the margin propensity to consume in this economy? Well, I already said the margin propensity to consume is 0.75. Then C, suppose the central bank's policy is to adjust the money supply to maintain the interest rate at 4%. So R equal 4. Solve for GDP. How does it compare to the full employment level, which is 2000? Well, we're going to solve for it. So now we have 4%. We're going to solve first by the investment. So then 50 times 4, 500 minus that. So then we have the level of investment is 300. Then we need to plug that information, the total formula for GDP, C plus I plus G. And then we have here 100 plus 300 plus 125. Then we have 525 plus this specific term, that it depends still with y. So then we are going to put that which is summing to the other side to minus, then we have y minus 0.75, this available income, and then we replace t for 100, and then we multiply the 0.75 for these two terms. And maybe I'm doing something wrong here. I know there's something wrong here, I'm so sorry, but it happens, at least I realized. Then we have here this minus times time minus is going to be plus, so this is going to be plus 75, and then it's going to be minus 75. So then given that, we're going to have 450, and then 450 over 450 over 0.25. I'm going to do that. I'm so sorry, but it happens. I'm going to do here. Let's see if I can do that. Well, let's see here. It's going to be 450 over 0.25. Then we have now understood. Now I understood completely because I did wrong. But anyway, I'm going to move forward. We have now the correct answer should be 1,800. Okay, so then this is not to be higher, it's going to be lower than 2,000. There is a gap of 200, right? So then, assuming no change in monetary policy, what change in government purchases would restore full employment? This gap of 200. So then we need a decrease in 400 is not true. We need an increase in the GDP of 200. But first we need to find out for the multiplier. We already know the value of the marginal propensity of consumption. Then we just replace in the equation of the multiplier. Then we find that the multiplier is equal to 4. So then in order to achieve to increase of 200, then what we need to do here is the situation of this equilibrium, which is wrong. Why is wrong? Because it's going to be 2 here should be 2,000, and then here should be 1,800. So this is there is a disequilibrium, but to the left, not to the right, because I did wrong. Then we have a multiplier of 4. So then we need to have an increase of 200 over 4. Then should be 50. You need to increase 50. So then an increase in 50, you will get y equal to 2,000. And proof, well, I did the proof wrong because I put with the 100, but the answer should be again 200 over 4. We should be an increase of 50. Okay, then this should be the case. Then E, assuming no change in policy, what change in the interest rate will restore the full employment? Then I should be in this case, remember, it should be exactly a change in 50 is what we already had a look. So then the I should be in this case, let me do this one. Okay, I was 300, but now I should be 350. Then we have here 350, then this one should be 350, then this one should be 150, and then R should be 150 over 50, then should be R equal to 3. So this should be the interest rate that will restore full employment. Well, I apologize, I did wrong, it's normal, sometimes it happens. I hope it doesn't happen in your exam, but that's the way. Okay, I hope it has helped with you. It doesn't make sense, this proof, because I did with wrong answers, but you can make the proof that is okay, just replacing with the total equation. Okay, thank you so much for following these videos. I hope it has helped, and thank you. See you next time. Bye bye.